Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and in today's edition, I want to talk about the French newspaper The Last Hour. There's a publication in cycling news where The Last Hour interviewed three directeurs sportifs: Vincent Lavenu from AG2R, Marc Matteo from FDJ, and Lotto Destiny Maxime Monfort, my old teammate. Now, I rode for Lotto back in the day, and I rode for FDJ back in the 90s with Marc Matteo. And like I said, I was teammates there with Maxime Monfort on Radio Shack. So I got an idea of at least two of these characters that are adding into the Last Hour newspaper here in France when they're interviewing them. And Marc Matteo's having a cry out saying that they need to cap the salaries here in the professional cycling peloton. And I just don't believe that we're at that place at the European peloton. Budgets, as posted there by the Last Hour newspaper, are between 8 million and 50 million. And indeed, that is a big difference, 50 and 8 million. And when we read into the article, Marc Matteo saying that these teams like Jumbo-Visma, UAE Team Emirates, they can come into these races with 4, 5, 6 leaders in the race, and there's just no way to affect the race. But that's not really true, right? I mean, when we look at FDJ and we go back to 2019 at the Tour de France that year, it was Thibaut Pinot. Now, Thibaut Pinot, in my mind, at the 2019 Tour de France was hands down the outright best rider that year. And I believe Egan Bernal was gifted a big present there when Thibaut Pinot had the incident with his leg just above the knee getting sore, and then he had to drop out of the race late into the mountain stages the final week of that year's Tour de France. Now, there is a little bit of question there with what I said on whether or not if Thibaut Pinot would be the outright favorite. Up to that moment, I saw him as being the outright favorite. Now, Thibaut Pinot has gone through many career Grand Tour races where he's had to drop out of those races for other reasons. So I can see where everyone might have thought that sooner or later he's going to drop out just because he has not finished so many Grand Tours. If we go back to that Giro d'Italia when he was sitting high up on the general classification, and then Froome just attacked everyone and blew the race up. And then, of course, Thibaut Pinot had some epic bad days after that. And so when I'm looking here at Marc Matteo and he's talking about, well, you know, the big teams will just always dominate with this budget. But that is sports. That's always the way it is. In the NFL, it's that way. In the NBA, it's that way. In baseball teams with bigger budgets, they do. But then there's always that year like 2019 with FDJ, with Thibaut Pinot at that year's Tour de France, where it looked like he could 100% win that year's Tour de France at moments throughout that period in the Tour. Now, when I take FDJ's Marc Matteo and he's talking about, well, we do 100% for our riders to look after him and stuff. I spent some time with FDJ and they look after you very well at the races and stuff. But a lot of times the riders aren't looked after as well as they could be at home because they're kind of left alone. And when we look at the comments from Maxime Monfort where he says, we do 100% of what we can for the racers when they're at the race. I spent the time with Lotto, and I could tell you stories where I had a broken bike and I couldn't get a new bike shipped to me overnight. I went to the Tour de France that year when we were racing in London. We landed in Belgium to meet up with the rest of the team, myself and Cadel Evans. And the Lotto team didn't even have bikes for me and Cadel to go out on a training ride, even though we were going to be there for a day and a half. And when I talked to the Lotto management, I said, hey, we need some bikes. We're getting ready for the Tour de France. We're 4 or 5 days out. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we're going to be in Belgium there long enough to where we could easily go out for a training ride. And we'd already lost 1 day on the plane, and our bikes weren't ready when we got there at noon. And then we were going to lose the next day. We weren't flying out until like 7 o'clock, if I remember right, or the next morning. Whatever it was a day and a half that we could have ridden 2 times before the Tour de France, and no one thought to bring our bikes. And it wasn't until I threw a fit and said, hey, we're getting ready for the Tour de France. I got to have my bike so I can go out and ride tomorrow morning at least, because I didn't ride today, that they finally brought the bikes. So when a lot of times when you see the directors and they say, wow, these bigger budgets, we just can't compete with them. Again, when we're talking Marc Matteo, well, you have Arnaud Démare on your team, who's one of the best sprinters in the world, but he's a little bit picky when he wants to be on 100% form. But you signed him, Marc Matteo. You have Davide Gaudu, who went second at Paris-Nice. Solid rider, not a prolific winner, right? He's not just dominant where he can win. but he's right up there with those guys. So if he can't win, you're missing 1-2% there. Find the 1-2% for the kid, and then all of a sudden he can win. Or if you don't believe he can do it, then you have to sign someone else. And then they still have Thibaut Pinot on the team that I'm sure is taking a massive salary for FDJ. So that's 3 big-time riders on FDJ. If you can't do it with 3 big-time riders, then it must be something that's either how you're picking the team or the fact that you're a French team and you want to take the 3 best French riders instead of taking one big rider from somewhere else around the world that maybe could come in there and find you that win that you're missing. Instead, they're spending the budget on 3 French guys, and he's complaining about how it's hard with the budget because the French rules, of course, the French government makes them pay more taxes, and you have to have workman's comp and all kinds of stuff to work there in France, so they have to pay more for the riders. But again, you have 3 big-time French riders on there. Get rid of 3 big-time French riders and sign 1 big-time rider like we saw Bjarne Riis do back in the day when he signed Alberto Contador. Remember that interview back in the day with Bjarne Riis when they're talking about comparing Team Sky and how he's going to beat Team Sky and stuff, and he said, they might be the best team, but I got the best rider in the world. I got Alberto Contador. So he was smiling the whole time, and Alberto Contador ended up winning him the Tour of Spain. And of course, we know Alberto Contador's resume throughout his career was always finding wins throughout the season and finding Grand Tour wins. And he found a Grand Tour win there for Bjarne Riis. So Bjarne Riis knew, I'll sign 1 rider and pay less to the other guys instead of like Mark Matteo where he's running 3. So when you're talking about capping off the salary of the riders, you just can't do it. The salary of the professional riders is just not that high. I mean, good riders are probably good domestiques when they come in making $300,000 to $500,000, and then the guys who can win are probably making $1 million to $1.5 million, like the Thibaut Pinot, Davide Gaudu, Arnaud Demar for FDJ. That's what those guys would be making. Then when we go over to Lotto Destiny, remember, Lotto Destiny has no reason at all to be complaining about the capping off the Pro Tour riders' salaries because they have Caleb Ewan on that team who should be able to win. The fact that he's crashed a lot and had some bad luck and injuries from those crashes, that's just a fact of life of sports. But you got to understand that with Caleb Ewan 100% on form, we go back to those 4 magical stage wins that Mark Cavendish had in the Tour de France a couple years back. If Caleb Ewan doesn't crash, doesn't push it hard in that stage 3 and take down Peter Sagan and doesn't crash, maybe Caleb Ewan has 2, 3, 4 stage victories in that year's Tour de France too. We'll never know. It's coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? But either way, when we're talking about teams like Lotto Soudal who have Arnaud Delis that they found and they have nurtured and made him into a big-time winner, and they have Caleb Ewan, that's 2 solid riders. If you can't get it done with that, that's nobody's fault. And when I really look deep into the 18, 20 teams at the World Tour level, there's only 18 at the World Tour, of course, but when you kind of throw in Israel Premier Tech in there, and then you throw in Lotto Destiny, who both got kicked out last year after that 3-year relegation for not having enough points, we're looking at 20 teams. Now, when you look, you see the 4 big ones that are winning, of course, this year that the Last Hour newspaper brought up. UAE team members, Tadej Pogacar, he's the most dominant rider in the world. And then Jumbo-Visma, the best team in the world, Primoz Roglic, Jonas Vingegaard, and of course, Wout van Aert. Those 2 teams are the most dominant. You look outside of those 2 teams, though, and you see Alpecin de Koenig that's being listed. But Alpecin de Koenig is getting it done with Jasper Philipsen and, of course, with Mathieu van der Poel. They have other wins throughout the season, but those are their 2 main riders that are really dominant. Nobody else on their team is actually dominant like Mathieu van der Poel and Jasper Philipsen are. So that's 2 good riders. You go down the next list and you look at Soudal Quickstep. We all know how they have failed miserably at the Spring Classics, but Remco Evenepoel has flown the flag there because he's been winning races over there at the UAE Tour and battling with Primoz Roglic when we're talking about Tour of Catalonia. So Remco Evenepoel's really been holding up the Soudal Quickstep team. But you look, they have Julian Alaphilippe on there too that's going through some injuries, so he's not winning. But they have 2 big riders, and then, of course, they have a couple solid sprinters on there. Tim Miller, one of the best in the world, and Fabio Jakobsen, probably the strongest, best, pure power sprinter out there. Maybe not the best sprinter in the world, but best pure power when his legs are still fresh. So they got 4 solid riders there. The fact they're not winning at the Spring Classics is because Remco Evenepoel's taken up the salary, but they still have a ton of wins already here in 2023. And then again, you look at the article from the last hour talking about Ineos only having 3 victories this year at the World Tour level, but they won the overall classification at Algarve with Danny Martinez, and then they won a stage there with Filippo Ganna in the individual time trial, and they won Strade Bianche with Tom Pidcock. So those are solid rides, right? Then all of a sudden you go to the Basque Country, and they won stage 1 with Ethan Hayter at the Basque Country and wore the race leader's yellow jersey. And remember, those are good wins here at the 2023 season, and that's without Egan Bernal. So when the last hour newspaper is running the article, what's happening to Ineos? Well, their biggest rider on their team, Egan Bernal, has been injured. Remember, he got crashed into the back of the bus last year while training in Colombia. And then he's had a couple crashes that have caused him some knee injuries here already early at the 2023 season. But Egan Bernal, winner of that year 2019 Tour de France over Thibaut Pinot, and then of course won the Giro d'Italia a couple years back, is a solid rider, but just with injuries. So when you look at it, you talk about Mark Meadows saying it's not so fair. There's 5 teams up there that can all battle with each other. That's looking pretty good when you're talking about 18, 20 teams total, and 5 of them are winning. So you're at about a third or a fourth of the competition that's winning. I think that's pretty fair. And Marc Madiot still could always get rid of his top French riders and sign one foreign rider on there that can win. Because the problem I have when you're looking at Thibaut Pinot, when you're spending that kind of money for a guy who doesn't win often, is, like I said, I believe, very good rider and could have won the 2019 Tour de France if he could stay healthy. But I've seen articles with Thibaut Pinot that says, well, I live on a farm, I have animals, I'm not 100% dedicated to the bike. I like to mix in that farm life and taking care of the animals. So he wants to do something other than ride his bike. And that's probably some of the problem why FDJ isn't winning, is because Thibaut Pinot is not 100% dedicated to the bike. He's got other things going on in his life. His words, not mine. So that takes away 1/3 of the riders there at FDJ. And now you're left with David Gaudu, who's still pretty young, so he could come good later. But at the moment, still missing that little bit of punch to, of course, compete with the best. But who can compete against Tadej Pogacar and Primoz Roglic, because they are hands down the best in the world. But again, talking about Marc Madiot, I think he's wrong in what he's saying here about doing salary cap, because when you look at the budgets and you look at the teams, you take riders from FDJ, they're paying 3 riders solid, and then of course you have Stefan Kuhn. I mean, this guy's a player, right? This is probably their best rider on FDJ, without a doubt in my mind, because he's the most consistent. The other 3 can win more often and bigger when they're on form, but they're not always on form, and Stefan Kuhn is usually on form, and he will usually find a win. So when you look at the article and you're talking about FDJ saying, well, sometimes these bigger teams, they can come in here with 4, 5, 6 guys and they can blow this race up at any point in the race and destroy everybody and still win. Man, give me the team with Stefan Kuhn, David Gaudu, Arnaud Démare, and Thibaut Pinot when he's not out there farming. He's 100% dedicated to the bike and on form. And that's 4 solid guys. If those 3 can't get it all together, keep Stefan Kuhn, get rid of the 3, sign one foreign rider that can, and all of a sudden, FDJ's Marc Madiot, you can start winning some bike races out there. When you say in the article that you just can't or won't be able to win this season as long as the salary caps stay the way they are. And keep in mind, when we're talking about the salary cap, as I said, good pro guys, when we're talking about good domestique guys making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, the bigger guys like David Gaudu, Pinot making $1.5 million, that's not life-changing money when you're losing a ton of it to all of a sudden the taxes, the travel. At my time when I was racing, I made that kind of money for 2 years. It was solid. I bought my house here in Bend, Oregon on that kind of money and set up my future afterwards. But I still have to work, and I still got a sugar mama who happens to be a lawyer that takes care of me very good. So you can get it done, and it's changing your life. But as a pro athlete, Marc Madiot, their time is very narrow. If they're racing 1-2 seasons and they have a bad injury, we take Egan Bernal, and let's say he had his injury earlier in his career and he loses out on all that big money. They don't have the ability to go into an office job, sit down on the chair, and continuously make solid money throughout a 30-year, 40-year period of their life. Cycling is short. They need to be able to make a bit more money than the normal person can, because the afterlife transitioning is a lot harder, unless, of course, you own a farm already and you've been farming. Then you just go straight into the farm thing like Thibaut Pinot does. Otherwise, when we're talking about capping the salary at professional cycling, they are nowhere near the pay scale right now at the professional level to be capping salary, because there's only a few riders making that kind of money, and they're called Primoz Roglic, Tadej Pogačar, Remco Evenepoel, Wout van Aert, Jonas Vingegaard, I'm sure, is making good money. And then there's a handful of others that are making solid money, but not the kind that you're just going to be able to quit and retire the rest of your life, unless, of course, you live in some very, very inexpensive country. That's my take up here on Beyond the Coverage. I hope you guys like it and can appreciate how hard the professional riders are there working and what's on the line every time they go out there and race that could end their career at any one of those crashes. So do I believe in a salary cap at the professional level? Absolutely not. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next edition real soon.